Hello everybody, welcome to part 2 of our Python Pandas series. In this tutorial, we're going to go over the basics of getting to know and accessing your data. Let's go ahead and jump right in and get started. The first thing we did is we imported our libraries, so we imported Pandas and Seaborn. Then we went ahead and pulled in two datasets. One is a CSV dataset, which is on our desktop here. And this is a quick preview of the dataset. It's just the US states with their capital and their approximate population. And then we used the Seaborn library to pull in some flights data here. Okay, so we're going to use both of those datasets, and we're going to go over how you can become more familiar with those datasets and what is in those datasets. We have already pulled those datasets in, so let's go over to our console here, and if you want a full preview of what your dataset looks like, all you have to do is type out the variable name and then hit enter. So let's go ahead and take a look at data frame 1, which is our states data. So let's type out data frame 1, let's go ahead and hit enter, and you can see a full preview of that states data. Now, quick note, if you have a really large data set, even with the full preview, you won't be able to see all of the data by default. Okay, so if you need to see the full set of data, you may have to look at it within a spreadsheet or a text editor, or somehow change the settings in your integrated development environment. Let's go ahead and do the same thing and get a preview of our flights data from the Seaborn library. So let's go ahead and type out data frame 2. And here we have the full preview. However, as we mentioned, notice that you cannot currently see the middle part of the dataset. Okay, moving on. Let's say that you wanted to see just the first few rows of your dataset. So to do that, you can use the head function. So let's go ahead and type out data frame 1, and then we'll use a dot, and we'll access the head. Let's go ahead and hit enter, and by default, we get to see the first 5 rows. We can do the same thing for dataset 2. And here you get a quick preview of the first 5 rows for the flights data. If you wanted to see the first 10 rows, you can use the head function for that as well. Let's use data frame 2 again. And inside the head function round brackets, we'll put an n equals 10. So that will show us the first 10 rows, okay? If you'd like to see the last 5 rows, you can use the tail function. So let's pull up data frame 1, use a dot and access tail, and by default you'll see the last 5 rows. Again, just like with the head function, if you'd like to see the last 10 rows, let's pull up data frame 2, use a dot to access the tail, and we'll put in n equals 10. And there we can see the last 10 rows of the flights data. If you'd like to get a general idea of the shape of your data, we'll pull up our data frame 1, and we'll use a dot and we'll access shape. Hit enter, and this will give you the number of rows by columns. So for our states data, it is 50 rows by 3 columns. If you'd like some more general information about your data set, let's go ahead and use data frame 2. All you have to do is type a dot and then type out info with your round brackets. Hit enter. And here you have some general information about your dataset, including information about the rows and columns. If you'd like to see the specific column header labels for your dataset, go ahead and pull up your variable name, use a dot, and type out columns. And so we can see for the states dataset, the column header names are state, capital, and population. Let's do the same thing for our flights dataset from the Seaborn library. The column header label names are year, month, and passengers. If you would like to display or work with a specific column in your dataset, go ahead and pull up your data frame variable name. Let's pull up data frame 1. And then you want to use square brackets and type the name of the column that you are interested in. So let's go ahead and pull up the column capital for our states data. Let's hit enter, and you can see that we have all of the capitals in the states dataset. If you would like to pull up multiple columns, you can do that. So to do that, let's use data frame 2. And the way that you do this is you use 2 sets of square brackets. So we have a square bracket and a square bracket. In single quotes, let's type out year, and passengers. Then make sure you close your double square brackets. And in this case, let's just look at the first 15 rows. So we'll use the head function, n equals 15. So there we have the columns year and passengers from our flights dataset displaying just the first 15 rows. Next up, let's go over how you can work with and display the rows in your data. Before we go over some examples for that, let's go over a few quick notes. When working with the rows in your datasets, at some point in time, you will probably need to use either loc or iloc, or possibly ix. However, note that ix is deprecated. So the .loc is used when you're dealing with labels, and the .iloc is used when you're dealing with positional indexing. So let's uncomment these prints for loc and iloc and pull up the help screen for each. If you're using the Spider IDE, you can click your cursor on the loc or the iloc and hit Command I, and that should pull up this help screen. Okay, so as we mentioned, the loc is for selection by label, and we'll show you some examples of that. And the iloc is for selection by position. And if it helps you remember, iloc here in the description, notice that it says integer location. So you could think of the I standing for integer. Okay, let's go over some examples. Let's go ahead and clear our console. When working with the loc and iloc, there are three ways that you will probably use most often to work with that data and access that data. You could pull out a single row, or you could access or pull out an array, or you can use a slice. So here we have gone ahead and created a simple data frame, and we have created two types of indexes. So currently for the index, we have a letter index. Let's go ahead and pull up our data frame 3. And you can see over here on the far left, for our row labels, we have the letter index A, B, C, D, and E. If we change this to the number index, let's go ahead and select that and run it. And now let's see what our data frame 3 looks like. So now you can see we have our numbers for the row labels. At this point, these row labels are just somewhat arbitrary, but they should work for these examples. Okay, so as we mentioned, these are a few ways that you can work with and access your rows. So let's go over some examples. Let's go ahead and change our index back to the letter index. Let's go ahead and run it. Let's just take a quick look and make sure that data frame 3 has the row letter indexes. And it does. We have A, B, C, D, and E. And using the loc, like this, let's just pull out row A. Now remember, the loc uses labels. So let's pull up our data frame 3. We're going to use a dot. We're going to access loc. And inside the square brackets, we'll put our label A. And you can see we have our row A data displayed here. Let's say that we wanted to use loc to pull out row labels A and B. Pull up your data frame 3, .loc, and remember to use the double set of square brackets. So we'll type A and then B, and then close your double set of square brackets. And you can see we have pulled out the data for rows A and B. You could also use a type of slice syntax. So let's say that we want to pull out rows A through C. Data frame 3, .loc. Let's use our square brackets, and our slice will be A through C. Now, something you might notice here that is somewhat different from using the iloc is this should actually return A through C, including C. Whereas when you're using the iloc with the slice syntax, I believe it returns the start position up to but not including the end position. And we'll test that here in just a second. Okay, so you can see using this syntax here, we get A through C. Let's go ahead and change our index back to the number index. Let's go ahead and run it to make sure it's changed. Let's pull it up. So now we have our data frame 3 with the number index 3691215. Now we can still use the loc even though this is a number type row label, and loc will recognize those as a type of label as opposed to a positional index. So let's go over a few examples. And let's say that we want to access row label 3. We can use .loc and put in our 3. And you can see we get back the data for row label 3. Again, we can use an array to access several row labels with loc. Data frame 3.loc. Again, remember to use your double square brackets. Let's put in 3 and 6. And close the double square brackets. And here we have our data for the row labels 3 and 6. Just remember, even though those row labels are numbers, they are treated as labels. And one final example for the loc. Let's go ahead and use a slice type syntax. .loc, square brackets, 3:9. And we get the data for row labels 3, 6, and 9. Now let's go over our examples for the iloc, which uses the integer-based positional location. Let's go ahead and pull up data frame 3. .iloc, in square brackets, let's use 0 because the index should start at 0. This should pull out the first row in the data set, which should be this here. Let's go ahead and hit return. And you can see we get the data for the first row, 1, 10, and 100. Now, just like for the loc, we can use an array and access several positions of the index. So let's say that we want to pull out the first and second rows using the positional locations of 0 and 1. Let's type out data frame 3.iloc. Use our double square brackets. We want the positional index 0, which is the first row, and the positional index 1, which is the second row. So that should return this data here, 1, 10, and 100, and 2, 20, 200. Let's hit return. And we get back the correct data. And for our final example using the iloc, let's use a type of slice syntax. Data frame 3.iloc, square brackets. We want to go from the beginning, wherever the beginning is, up to, but not including, positional location 3. Okay, so this would be row 0, this would be row 1, 2, and 3. Now, as we mentioned with the iloc, which is slightly different from the loc, this should go up to but not including 3, whereas with the loc, it goes up to and including. So using this slice type syntax, this should start at the beginning and go up to but not including 3, so it will go to here but not include row label 12 and its data. Let's go ahead and hit return, and you can see we get back rows 3, 6, and 9, but using the positional index 0 up to but not including 3, which would be this data, 0, 1, 2. Okay, so that's all we have for this Python Pandas tutorial on the basics of getting to know and accessing your data. We will be doing many more Python Pandas tutorials in the near future. Join us for those, and we'll see you next time.